Hello, everybody out there in cyberspace. I'm Polly Morris. I'm the executive director of the Lynden Sculpture Garden. This is not Lynden, this is my kitchen, but we are very happy that you're joining us tonight for our first virtual Women's Speaker Series event. Given current circumstances, we imagine there are going to be more of these to come. We know we have one coming up on June 1st, and you'll be hearing more about that. I know because I've heard from many of you that some of you are anxious to return to Lynden sooner rather than later. We do remain closed while the stay-at-home order is in place, but we are already planning, going through the rather arduous planning process about reopening to the public. The grounds will be opening first, probably well before the house does. So if you are on our mailing list, you will hear from us when it's possible to come back and walk the grounds and visit the sculptures and chase away the geese who are taking over the entire place. So the only other thing I'd like to plug at the moment is our virtual hub. We've been putting out a lot of virtual content for families who are trying to teach their kids at home, for people who would like to visit different Lynden sculptures or projects, and a lot of content for teachers, some of it made by teachers, some of it made by artists. So that's lynden.tours. I'm going to turn this over to Daniel Golden of Boswell Books. He's going to give you some instructions for how to behave in this particular Zoom and some technical tips. And we will go from there to Margie Stratton of Milwaukee Reads and onward. So thank you all for being here tonight.
Thanks, Polly. Yes, welcome to our first virtual Women's Speaker Series event. It is day 4051 of Boswell being open, and if you had told me this is what it was going to be like at around 3,800, I would have laughed you out of the room. But such as it is, bookstore is physically closed as well, but we are really, really grateful to everyone who's been ordering books from us. And we've been doing curbside pickup, or sidewalk pickup, as we say. A lot of shipping at a very inexpensive media mail rate, and a lot of deliveries. We tend to go up and down Lake Michigan, but every so often we surprise people with a run to like Wauwatosa or something. And we are very grateful to Margie, who when I was sort of had to cancel like 38 events in a week, and that set me into a funk. And literally, I got to the point where I could not remember which day it was anyway. She said, "This must happen," and was definitely the driving force in putting it together and getting our author involved, and Amy Taylor and Susan. So we're very grateful. And so with her shot of adrenaline, we are in fact preparing for the next event, which will also be virtual, with Mary Alice Munro, a longtime best-selling writer who has a great deal of affection for Milwaukee, writes wonderful novels, often with environmental themes, which seems perfect for the Lynden. That's on June 1st. We'll have a registration up for that shortly, from as soon as we get Polly all the information to get the registration up. Boswell has a few other virtual events coming up. The three I can remember are tomorrow we're hosting the runaway best-selling mystery writer, at least in Milwaukee, Erica Ruth Neubauer, for her novel about 1920s Egypt called Murder at the Mina House. If you like PBS mystery, it's not a thriller, it's not a psychological suspense book. There isn't a lot of blood on the walls. It is a traditional mystery. There's a little blood on the walls. And we have a launch coming up with, I'll bet she's done something with the Lynden Sculpture Garden, Ann Basting, who has her the launch of her debut major, her first novel from a traditional big big publisher called Creative Care. That's on May 19th. We're registering people from that. The newsletter will go out any second, announcing it. And then I wanted to mention, I believe, Bon Barry, who another big bestseller at Boswell, called We Ride Upon Sticks, about a high school field hockey team in 1980s Massachusetts who sort of decides to invest in a little witchery to win games. And there's other stuff coming up too. It all pales in comparison to tonight's event. I don't want to I want to make sure everybody knows that. And for that, I would like to introduce the producer of Milwaukee Reads, Margie Stratton. Thanks, Margie.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you for coming this evening, everyone. It's so great to see so many faces and names on the screen. Thank you to Boswell and to Lynden Sculpture Garden. I mean, how lucky are we in Milwaukee that we have both of them to keep us happy and to keep us engaged and keep us intellectually stimulated. So thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Polly. Well, tonight, I am so excited to welcome Wade Rouse to our first ever online Women's Speaker Series event. I, of course, would rather have been able to walk around Lynden's beautiful gardens and among the sculptures with Wade in person, but this is certainly a treat to be able to spend time with him online as well. I've enjoyed reading about Wade and his homes and his gardens and his books for years now. I think it was probably the magazine Coastal Living where I first read his writing. That was one of my favorites. And then it was also his book, Confessions of a Prep School Mommy Handler, where I thought, is this the same guy? And I have enjoyed reading about him from one of my favorite book newsletters, the Book Reporter newsletter. And then when he started writing as Viola Shipman, and I found out that my friend and the natural born interviewer, Amy Taylor, knew him from across the lake, Lake Michigan, that is. The idea started forming in my mind that I'd like to host the two of them for a conversation at Lynden. I didn't think that Wade would be 5 Viola Shipman books in before we'd get them together, but now here we are, and we're here for the latest in his series of novels, The Heirloom Garden. And this is following in the footsteps of the successful books, The Charm Bracelet, The Hope Chest, The Recipe Box, and The Summer Cottage. I have some on display behind me here. And Amy Taylor, whom we have all seen and heard on WTMJ, WKTI, AM 620, and of course the Morning Blend, and whom my mother would regularly refer to as, and this is the entire phrase she would say every time, "You mean Reitman and Miller and Amy Taylor too?" Every time I mentioned Amy's name. Yeah, she's a natural in the hot seat, as we know, and also behind a microphone and on screen. And she's a lover of books as I am. So I'm thrilled that she's here tonight to chat with Wade, AKA Viola. Now, Wade writes under the pen name Viola Shipman, his grandmother's name, in order to honor the woman whose heirlooms and family stories inspire his fiction. I'm excited to hear that Viola will be publishing another book in April of 2021 called The Summer Camp, and to be followed by a winter-themed novel later that fall, too. But tonight, of course, we celebrate the Heirloom Garden, which Library Journal describes this way: Shipman's charming stories of finding peace, listening to your heart, and remembering those who came before you are just what the world needs right now. I don't know about you, but I really need this right now. Welcome to Amy and Wade.
Thank you so much, Margie. Good evening, everybody. I'm actually so very moved to see all of you tonight, and I applaud you for showing up and for continuing to show up and for continuing to live your lives the best that you can, because this is certainly an altered reality. And I just think it's so great to see all my friends. I never get to see the people I'm talking to. I mean, that's crazy. And I love that I've seen somebody's petting their dog on the bottom of the screen. I wish I would have brought my dog, but tonight I did bring some flowers for Wade. Oh, he's giving me a heart back. I did get the violets. I don't have the iris yet, but They're not blooming here because it's absolutely freezing cold in Milwaukee, right? So it's too early, but here are the flowers from me to you and to all of you who are participating tonight. So here, one thing I want to say is, look at the book right now. You can get it at Boswell. And I just want to welcome Wade this evening and to say thank you for putting your heart and soul into these books. They are just such a treasure. And I absolutely love your writing. I feel like I know Viola Shipman, and I want to know Wade Rouse tonight. So welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for everybody involved tonight in pulling this off. You know, as we were talking before we went live, this is, I think we're all relearning a lot of things and learning a lot on the fly, but it's been incredibly wondrous. You know, my book tour was canceled. My 3-week book tour was canceled, and I was heartbroken. But this, you know, evenings like this and being able to connect with readers everywhere has just meant the world to me. And I think people are loving this. We need these kinds of moments, these virtual hugs and this virtual love right now. So thank you all.
So happy to be here, Wade. I do want to talk about how the titles of the books, the Hope Chest, the Charm Bracelet, the Heirloom Garden, all of these things are things that give us great comfort. And I think, as Margie was saying, we all need a dose of this right now. Is that something that you're aiming to do with your work and as an artist?
Yeah, you know, very much so. I think you just hit it on the head. You know, as was mentioned, all of my novels are written under my grandmother's name. And my grandparents, as I've mentioned many times before, were working poor. You know, I grew up in the Missouri Ozarks. My grandmother was a seamstress. My grandfather was an ore miner. They literally had no money, but they saved change in an old crock in their garage. And when it got full, they took it to the community bank and started a college fund for my mother. And she would become the first in our family to go to college. So, you know, I grew up with my grandparents. Their stories and their sacrifices truly changed my life. And I think, like many of us out there, many readers, the same holds true. And, you know, we tend to overlook these objects that meant so much to our elders. Charm bracelets, hope chests, recipe boxes, even gardening. And, you know, my mom and dad passed away over the last decade. And when my dad was ill, you know, as many of us do, you have to get the house ready to sell and move him into a smaller place. And I was going through boxes of stuff that, like we all do, that we have, you know, attics and pole barns and garages full of stuff. And I came upon all of these objects that were just stowed away. And I know it sounds somewhat corny, but it's true. You know, that's when I realized that my grandparents were the richest people I'd ever known. They got it. They got what life was about. They knew what meant the most. And I think it's what we're learning right now. We've relearned again, and that's things that truly matter, the things that we take for granted too often, and that's each other and our health and our friends and our family. And that's what I like to write about. That's the foundation of every novel I write, including the Heirloom Garden, is, you know, I want to remind readers what matters most in life, and that's just each other.
That's a beautiful sentiment. The book takes place during the Second World War, and then in 2003 during the Iraq War. And I was so struck by the parallels to the pandemic that we're enduring right now. And in fact, the thing that just hit me was Ring Around the Rosie. I could not believe Ring Around the Rosie. I didn't know this. Could you talk about that poem and that nursery rhyme and the meaning in the book and how it relates to today?
Yeah, it actually has we know it as a children's game and that they sing, but it's actually has a horrific kind of history. I mean, it's based on people dying of the plague. So it's
crazy.
So, you know, and you've hit on another interesting point. You know, every novel I write, people always ask, is it an heirloom that really gets you going on the story you want to tell? And it is, but I think as a writer, and I think many writers are the same, I want to answer questions, big questions. And for me, it was what makes us isolate ourselves from the world and what gives us hope. And, you know, I never anticipated over a year ago how important those questions would be. And I've thought so much about my elders, I think like so many of us have the past few weeks. You know, these are people that went through war, depression, poverty, and disease. And like my grandparents, all of my grandparents, they did it with incredible resilience and strength, but also with a sense of grace. And I recall, you know, right now, many of their stories that they told me of how they survived and what they did to get through it. And, you know, that's what's kind of buoyed me and given me strength as we go through this right now. So I didn't really realize how important those questions would be until March.
Right. Well, the thing about the stories that you tell, they really do transcend time. And that's really the mark of great writing. And I think, like you're saying, you weren't being predictive, but you do talk about isolation a lot. And one of your main characters, Iris, is actually an agoraphobic. And I want to talk about, she wants everything delivered and she never wants to see a soul. And it's like, that's what I'm becoming right now during the pandemic. And I'm thinking, somebody called me, I have to talk. Weird, you know? And I just want to talk about how you were able to get inside of her mindset, because I think it's really a beautifully drawn character.
Thank you very much. You know, Iris was a fascinating character to me. You know, a woman in her 80s who is incredibly smart. She was a botanist, you know, in a time in which women didn't have such careers. She lost her husband in the war. She lost her daughter to polio and ended up losing her career in a male-dominated world, and isolates herself from the world because she really can't stand to take any more grief or loss in her life. And it's interesting. Iris was a very tough character, tough and easy for me to get around, because what I wanted to write a lot about in this novel, and what I preach in my writing workshops too, is that I think fear controls so many of us in our life. We start off as kids and we have big dreams. And then as we grow older and become adults, we become defined by not what excites us anymore, but what we're expected to do and achieve. And you know, fear is horrible. I mean, it shackles us. And I wanted to explore Iris, you know, much like I wanted to explore some of my family members. My brother passed away when he was 17 and I was 13. And my grandmother, my mother was a very outgoing person, but as you can imagine, after my brother passed away, she shut down completely and did not want to leave the house, could not associate with the world again. And my grandmother got she and myself out of the house and out of our bedrooms by getting us into the garden. She helped us do simple acts of like weeding and mulching and watering and, you know, pruning, just repetitive acts that kind of grounded us again. So I was fascinated by kind of the story of my life, but also what fear, I think, does too much to too many of us in this world, you know?
Well, you kind of took my breath away there for a moment. I think we all can relate to loss. And I personally know 4 fathers who were lost in this pandemic. I'm sorry. So, and I know that you have suffered a loss, your husband. I'm so sorry. I didn't expect to feel so emotional. I mean, right now. But to know 4 fathers who passed away, I'm so sorry. And I'm going to throw it to you so you can talk through your tears. I'm so sorry. I want to give you my condolences.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we were talking before this. My father-in-law passed away of the coronavirus, and You know, he was, not to segue too much, but he was the most amazing person in the world, and also a surrogate father to me. And when I talk about in my novels, you know, I always say I write about ordinary people that tend to be too often overlooked in society, that I think are extraordinary. The ripple effect that their simple lives have on so many of us is what I like to explore. You know, and this was a man who started working in grade school and high school to go to college. He went to Valparaiso. He worked 2 to 3 jobs to work his way through college during his bachelor's degree. He walked onto the football team. He played, he ended up playing and getting knocked around by a bunch of guys that were going to play for the Green Bay Packers and enter the Hall of Fame. He ended up getting his PhD in education and becoming a superintendent. And his fight and his spirit and his love and his soul, I think, is probably like everyone that you know and we've lost. You know, I don't want these lives to be forgotten. I don't want their stories to be lost. And that is why I write the novels I do. I want, you know, you're sharing a story right now, heartbreaking stories of so many that we've lost. But my hope is, and I know that it will happen, is that will live on.
And that's a beautiful thing. I'm just going to toast to Gary's dad and to all of those that we have lost, and to everybody, please toast if you're able. And let's not forget the stories of those that we love. And I'm going to have a little drink. I promise that's the first one tonight. Okay. We got that over with.
And I love that we need this right now. We need to connect. I mean, we're all going through so much, and to have these moments and we can share them together is, I mean, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you for the writing and here goes the nose again. You know, the way that you honor those that you've lost, those that we've lost and loved. I think this is just a beautiful novel, the Heirloom Garden, the way it wraps around the garden and the way you set it up around the flowers. That's so beautiful. Can you talk about how you got that idea?
Yeah. You know, my grandmother was a grand gardener. My mother was a great gardener. My husband, Gary, is an incredible gardener. And I've always been, and I know so many people in my life that are wonderful gardeners. First, you know, I think flowers for so many of us bring back a specific memory, a family, you know, the smell, something resonates deeply with us. You know, for me, my grandmother grew beautiful peonies, still my favorite flower in the world, that smelled like heaven. And she grew rows of them, and she hung her laundry line over them so that when she would dry her sheets and I would stay with her, the sheets smelled like the peonies. So I think they bring back very, you know, specific, beautiful memories. And I also wanted to talk about the history of these flowers, how they came to Lake Michigan, you know, how they came to our area, what they mean, their histories. And I also wanted to explore a woman that could no longer nurture anyone's life, but she could nurture these flowers just as if they were her own children and grandchildren. You know, Iris, you know, in the novel, she hybridizes and creates flowers, roses, daylilies that take on the characteristics of all those she's lost, you know, peach roses that are the color of her husband's cheeks, so that when she walks in her garden, she's surrounded by her family and those she's lost. And I just love hinging novels around universal things that we take for granted that mean so much to all of us.
Well, you took me right back there because my Uncle Buddy, who is from Louisville, Kentucky, had a rose garden, and he had the exact kind of ledger that you describe on the ruled paper, and he kept track of every rose. He knew what every flower was doing, and it made such a huge impression on me. It's like I felt like I was right there, just as I felt when you talk about the hybridizing of the daylilies. I imagine myself there and you teaching me how to do this. And I've always wondered about the mystery of those daylilies. Could you talk about the pantyhose a little bit?
Yeah. So this came through research and through two very dear friends who lived next door to a woman that actually helped inspire a little bit of iris. But yeah, you know, in the war, people didn't waste anything. So in talking about the, you know, hybridizing of the daylilies, Iris takes, you know, her old pantyhose and ties them around the daylily stalk so that they captures the seeds. So, you know, they'll just naturally fall in there and she can keep them without having to run out every hour or two to monitor how they're doing. So then she can easily gather them and take them into her greenhouse. So, and that's true. You know, I know so many. It's funny because the hard thing on this is I did a lot of research on flowers, but I didn't want to get anything wrong. So I was checking, double checking, quadruple checking to make sure all the heirloom gardeners didn't call me out on anything.
Well, that's what I wondered. Is that a thing?
It's a thing.
It is
not
a thing.
As much, but there are still a number of gardeners that do that kind of use the old school tricks.
I love learning about the old school tricks. I also want to talk about this Van Gogh. Iris talks about Van Gogh saying that this is, I think everybody who loves art and beauty would relate to this quote. Iris talks about Van Gogh living in the asylum in France during the end of his life. And she says he considered it to be a monastery and an art studio all in one. He believed he was not mad when he was painting. Can you discuss how the influence of beauty can affect the harshness of our reality? I think it's particularly poignant right now.
I'm glad you brought that up. No one's actually brought that up before.
Oh, hey, all right then. I'll drink to that.
We had the privilege of visiting Monet's gardens a couple of years ago, and I was doing a lot of research and preparation, and visiting his gardens and seeing where he painted and stayed nearly all day and just saw the changing perspective of the sun. You understood how and why he painted what he did. You got it. And there is, and it's even more important right now, but for me, writing, creating is how I make sense of the world. And it's also what I believe saved my life. For anybody that is creative, it could be painting or quilting, whatever you do, there is a beauty in being able to lose yourself to an art or a craft that takes you from this world. And my first book I wrote was a memoir about growing up gay in the Missouri Ozarks, and that book saved me. It truly did. I was not happy in my life. I was not happy with what I was doing, and that changed me profoundly. And I've been doing a lot of Facebook Lives every Tuesday and Thursday, and I've been encouraging people, be scared, be upset, be whatever emotion you feel, but also try to be creative right now. Try to do something that lifts you and takes you away from our current place. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's one of my favorite pieces in the book. So thank you.
I loved that too. I loved feeling like I was taking a trip to Giverny to see the gardens. That was a beautiful thing. Let's talk about also the impact of the Victory Gardens. That was one of the first things that came to my mind during this time, during the coronavirus and pandemic, was how everybody pitched in together. And it seems like we don't have enough together these days, people. And to be united in a common effort is such an incredible thing. And I want us as a nation to feel that again. And you, obviously, it struck a chord with you too.
It did. Part of it was, my grandmothers, both grandmothers were wonderful flower gardeners, but they also had huge vegetable gardeners. And their belief was, living through what they'd lived through, that at any time, depression, war, loss of money could happen. And they always wanted to have a supply of food available. And I've been fascinated with the, there's Victory Gardens are hugely resurgent right now. New York Times, CBS Sunday Morning have done stories on Victory Gardens over the last couple of weeks. And, women at that time led the charge. And I believe, if I'm getting my facts correct, provided 40% of the food for our nation during World War II. Wow. Also fed soldiers, allies, and their communities. And we're seeing that again now. I mean, we're all buying seeds. We're all planting gardens in our backyards because we're not going to the store. We want our own food supplies. So Grandma was right. And I was really fascinated with the research of just how many women were involved in this effort to not only feed their communities, but also feed their souls at a time when those they loved were gone and separated, and they were isolated, and they needed something to get them through a day. And I remember my grandmother's telling a lot of stories. So it's a very important part of the book, what Iris goes through, what it means, her perspective, kind of, I always say, the ghost on her shoulders that, that forces her to make the decisions. This is the novel, as you talked about, Iraq War and World War II. It's the first novel I've written that has a dual storyline. So I'm really proud of, I did a lot of research to try and get this right. And, I always say I love and admire authors like Eric Larson. Yes. When you read them and you go, oh my God, they did so much research, and then they made it seem like they just made it up. So I tried my darndest to get all of this right.
You succeeded. You did. You succeeded. I want to shift gears a little bit. There's so much to talk about. And Daniel promised me that this would probably go an hour. I was like, really? Most interviews I do are 3 to 5 minutes. Okay, we just have to talk about this quote right now, because this is just so beautiful. Okay, are you ready, people? It's from Nathaniel Hawthorne. Happiness is a butterfly, which when pursued is always just beyond your grasp, but which, if you sit down quietly, may alight upon you. Whoa. Okay, I feel like that was like, send that right here for right now, right? I mean, everyone is in this period of quieting, and we're having to listen, and you talked about things we were learning. Are you learning anything about yourself that you didn't know?
Yeah, very much so. And I love that. I love that quote. I use quotes in between chapters in this novel. Every chapter centered around an heirloom flower. But there's
you mean this novel?
and an illustration. And I wanted people to I wanted to give them pause and think about what was to come. I have learned a lot. I've learned. I've hearkened back to, again, the stories that my grandparents taught me and told me, and how they got through their hard times, which is really helping me right now. I'm relearning. We talked about doing events like this. It's been exciting and a little bit maddening to kind of learn a lot on the fly again, and I've loved it. Wow. I'm reconnecting with readers in a way I never thought possible. I've gotten countless emails and messages from readers who work unusual hours. They're waitresses at night, or they're nurses who work evening shifts, and they can't go to author events. They can't go to the movies typically, and they're able to be a part of this. they're able to either see it live or they're able to revisit it at another point. And they've, they've reached out to me into a way that has not happened before. So, talk about the ability to find incredible things in the worst of times.
That's the truth. I do want to open it up a little bit right now by way of allowing our participants to ask questions of you. I want them to feel that they have the time to talk to you because you're such a spectacular person. And I'd like to introduce Susan Mccullough right now. She is in our audience of Zoomers, not Boomers. And Susan is a writer, a film and theater producer. She's so accomplished. She's just an incredible person. I have to say that in addition, I'm so biased. This is not like the news. It's so great to just be able to say what you think. She's also a communications coach and one of my best friends in the world. And so she also happens to know Wade. So I wanted to introduce her tonight to ask some questions about our author tonight. Hi, Susan.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Amy. Thank you. And hello again to Wade. A quick thing before we get started, just as a reminder, as Amy has said a couple of times, boswellbooks.com to order the book if you don't already have a copy. And you'll see that I am coming to you tonight live from the Wade Rouse Viola Shipman fan club fort. I have read every book that Wade Viola has written. He was just talking about America's Boy, that's right here. I've got all of his memoirs, all of the Viola Shipman series, and Amy asked me just to say how I knew Wade before I asked a question, and I will tell you, I met Wade because of Daniel Golden and the wonderful people at Boswell bookstore. Wade and Gary came to Milwaukee to host a half-day seminar many years ago, back when I was thinking about starting a first novel, still working on it, by the way, sidebar, but nonetheless, not Wade's fault. I was determined when I went to that seminar that I was just going to listen and wasn't really going to say much because I just wanted to learn. And Wade did such a good job cultivating everybody there that I talked nonstop and have met two people. There were only about 12 of us around that table at Boswell, and two of them have become very close friends of mine since then. After that, I was fortunate enough to go to a workshop in Saugatuck. And again, it was that connection that Wade brings to people. When he sits down, you feel as though you've known him your whole life. And I think that's how we all feel when we read his books, his characters that he brings to life. I'm sad when the book's over because I'm not going to have those characters. And back to what you said, Amy, I am Iris. I have found during this pandemic, I don't want to go outside. I'm afraid to even go get the paper. And so it's crazy, but
I shouldn't be laughing, really.
But I resonated with her, as I always do, with Wade and Viola, their wonderful books, the character development, and the way he brings the world together. So thanks for letting me be here and letting me ask the first question. Here's a question. Wade, as I said, I've read all your memoirs, also have read all the Viola books. How is it that, most authors have a hard time just writing in their own name. How do you write in two different names and two different voices? And what are the tools that you found for doing that?
It's a great question. I can't just say that I'm incredibly gifted.
Yes, you can. You can say that.
So, it is, here's what's interesting. When I started, the backward story, when I started writing my first book, America's Boy, a memoir, I started it as fiction because, as I talk about in my writing workshops, I was scared to really write truthfully about my own life. And that was a massive failure, so I restarted. And I wrote four memoirs before I started writing the Viola novels. And it's my voice. It is, I always preach about writers should channel. We all tell the same stories. It's just how we tell them in our own unique voice that sets us apart. That's all we have going for us. So listen to what's up here. and fear will knock that out of you, so don't let that happen. But I got used to writing in that voice. And I have to say, when I started writing The Charm Bracelet, which is my debut novel as Viola Shipman, it was incredibly difficult because it was a much different writing experience. One, as my agent pointed out so well, I was writing not just one female character, but 3 female characters over the course of a lifetime, and dealing, strongly with women's issues and relationships. And she's like, you only have one chance to get this right, or it's all over for you. And I really, I told writers this, and I had done this, but I really listened to my own advice. I stopped, and I literally stopped. That book took me almost 3.5 years to write. I started reading classics. I started reading some of my favorite writers. I started reading popular women's fiction authors to understand how a novel came together, because it was much different building the story arc, the narrative, the full deep characters than it was me writing about people I knew and loved in my own life. Interestingly, that has become easier for me now. And as we were talking before this, I just sold my first memoir in a decade, which will be out probably within the next year or so.
Oh, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
I'm really excited. And I went back to writing in my own voice, and it was very difficult and also very different than what I'd done before. It's significantly more stripped down, it's more sparse, and I love it. I think it's, I just love the progression of how fiction actually changed my nonfiction voice, if that makes sense. So it's been an incredible journey, and I feel blessed to write both, because it truly completes my soul. My goal is to write a novel and write a memoir and write a novel, and I feel like I'm in that wheelhouse again, and I feel very complete again.
Wow.
That's just incredible.
So I think Amy wanted me to kick it out for questions, and I was just going to do the reminder that if you don't see a list of participants on the right side of your screen, what you need to do if you want to ask a question is click down at the bottom of the screen, and you'll see a little tag that says participants. And when you click that, then the names should appear along the right side. And next to that, it should say raise your hand at the bottom. So go ahead and raise your hand if you have a question. And Chris and Daniel are going to moderate who's asking the next questions.
Yes, I am ready to. Now, of course, it's always tough to get the first question. I feel like I'm playing wheel. I'm spinning the wheel, looking, no whammies. Here we go. Why, that's Margie. Let's see. Margie Stratton. What's your first?
Wade, you mentioned before we got on the call something about 5 a.m. And I just was hoping that you would tell us a little bit about your writing routine and where you write and what your view is, and how you get it all done.
I'm very obsessive. And I think most writers are. So I get up early, I caffeinate heavily, and I start writing. I like to write in the morning before, I always say, before the day intrudes on you too much, before you get 1,000 emails and the phone has rang 5,000 times. That's when I'm most productive. I'm fresh, and I just feel like I'm in my zone. I require 2 things when I write. I require quiet. I am not a writer that can go, I admire people that can go to coffee shops. They can't now, but at Starbucks, and they're writing and they like that noise. I am not that person. I shush my dogs when they shake. Gary walks by because he's always talking, and I'm like, shh, music goes on, don't. So quiet's a big thing, and I have to have a view. So I'm currently in Palm Springs still, or I should be back in Michigan now, but I'm not. And I have a view of the mountain, which is lovely, and I'm blessed. And centers me and guides me. And when I'm in Michigan, I overlook the woods that are, we're just a couple of miles from Lake Michigan. And so a view and quiet is what I require, and lithium and caffeine and wine. Besides that, all good besides that.
Oh. I have a couple more questions, actually, if no one has more questions. But I really want to talk about Michigan a little bit because, as you know, I've been going there since I was 13 to Saugatuck. We took our first trip as a family, and we rented a house in town, and then we started exploring, and my family fell in love, and so we bought a house there in the 80s. So it's worth a little more now than it was then. But I want you to talk about your place, because that's where you said you've written like six and a half novels, right? At your Michigan house. And you call it Turkey Run. Do turkeys have anything to recommend them? That's what I really want to know. They're so strange.
They do. Turkeys are, and I write a lot about wild turkeys in this novel for some reason. They're their own strange character, but they wander through. We have 8 acres, a little cottage, knotty pine cottage on acreage, and it's quiet and beautiful. And wild turkeys just walk through and chatter pretty much a lot of the day. So that's why we named it that. I love it. I'm obsessive with space. My home and my offices, I think, like to so many of us, mean more than just being a home. They're a place where we're safe and we're loved, and we can be our best selves and our most creative. And that's what the place in Michigan and our place in Palm Springs mean to me. I can't imagine moving. I can't imagine changing. My offices are the way I like them. Don't mess with them.
Totally.
And so it's a magical, Michigan, and I say the same thing about Wisconsin too. Gary grew up going to Hayward, Wisconsin. We forget how stunningly beautiful the states that we live in are. You travel and you return home and you're like, I get why I live here.
Yeah.
And Lake Michigan, is the center of every single novel I write. And that's, that whether you're in Wisconsin or Michigan, that's what unites us. And, the scenery is ever changing. It's gorgeous. And, I like to make the setting as big a character in my books as the characters are. So it's a hugely important piece of my writing.
When you and Gary left the city for the countryside of Michigan, you took a big leap, right? And I want to examine sort of the leap you took then in relation to, at that point you said you had to let go of your cynicism. What did you mean by that? And do you think that'll happen now since coronavirus? Do you think people will soften up a little? I keep waiting. Where are the tender hearts of the world?
I hope, it is so, what's amazing is I think it depends on where we are right now. And I hope we will see the best of people. I haven't loved what I've seen of Michigan recently, but I have to say here in California, the beauty, when I go, I'm a big runner. When I go for a run, people are yelling at me good things. They're yelling, "We can do it. We got this. You got this." And I think they mean that collectively, that I'm trying to be healthy. They're trying to be healthy. We're out together. We're doing this together. And people in Southern California have been incredibly supportive of one another, incredibly respectful. So I hope that's what we see fully. It's the longer we're in this, the worse we're going to see the best and the worst of people.
I think that's very astute of you. I also just want to thank you so much for your time tonight. And I want to tell people that they can get the book at boswellbooks.com. It's called The Heirloom Garden by Viola Shipman, AKA Wade Rouse. Oh, look at everybody. Yay. That's so great. And Daniel, do you want to say a few more words?
We have a few we have a couple more questions. You want to do that, or you want to? Let's. I have. Let's see. Nancy. If she wants to show herself.
Hi.
Hi. Nancy.
Hi. So I have two questions. One is, what kind of reaction have you gotten over the years for a guy writing under a female name? I'm sure you get that question a lot. And then the other question I have is, irises happens to be my favorite flowers.
Oh, wow.
And I was wondering how you come up with your characters' names.
Good questions. You know, it's interesting. Not as much as it used to happen, but I used to go to events early on as, you know, Viola, and there would be a large contingent of women, especially in the front rows, that would go when I'm introduced. That's a man. Why is he going up there? So I'm like, did you not read the book jacket? You know, I still get that sometimes, but what I've learned is I never wanted from the beginning to dupe anyone. I wanted to be very honest about the backstory as to why I chose a pen name for my fiction. And what's been wonderful and very humbling to me is how much that backstory has resonated with readers. You know, for me, I don't want to get emotional either, but it is the smallest thank you that I can give to my grandmother for all she did to me. And nothing brings me greater joy and happiness than knowing, hopefully in 100 years, people walk into a bookstore or a library and they pick up a book by me that has my grandmother's name on it, and they understand that backstory, and it helps them reconnect with their own family or ask a question that they've never asked before. That's lovely to me. So it's the response has been incredible, not only in the US, but around the world. People seem to have really taken that to heart. And choosing character names is actually harder than you think. I spend a lot of time, one of the things I do before I start a novel is I do pretty in-depth character sketches, which is very different from memoir because I know everybody I'm writing about. But I want to get inside their skins. I want to know what they wear, the colloquialisms they use when they speak, what they eat, every little nuance. And character names are a very important part of that because you use them so many times in a novel that you want it to make sense not only with the narrative, but with the reader. You want the reader to go, oh, and that they become family or a friend. So it's hard to, and I probably go through many iterations of naming a character in a novel. Oftentimes I'll just put XX, not dirty wise, but just, I fill it in just to think what's going to make sense. I usually have 5 or 6 names that I use. So, and I love old-fashioned names. Like Iris is a beautiful name. Rose is a beautiful name. I love those names, and I've been fascinated because they're all coming back in vogue again. I always say what goes out of style always comes back again.
I think we have our questions. So I wanted to thank everyone who's involved for this. Obviously, Wade Rouse and Gary Edwards, who are, the team that, well, we're just so grateful. We're grateful in Milwaukee, virtually or otherwise. The Lynden Sculpture Garden, Polly Morris, please consider supporting them, both virtually and otherwise. And Margie Stratton and Milwaukee Reads, we're very excited about our June event. Amy Taylor, a spectacular interview, and Susan Mccullough, whose enthusiasm, I believe, drives everything. So, so we will keep posted. We're going to try to have this edited a little and then available. This is our first event that we've recorded by popular demand, so we will spread that around. And the book is available. We have a few hardcovers and paperbacks too. They're both actually on sale. We have a very minimal shipping cost or sidewalk pickup. Wade, would you like to say the last word? It feels like
Please support Boswell. Support your independent booksellers. They're the hearts of our communities, and they need your support more than ever. So please I'm not embarrassed to say order multiple copies of the Heirloom Garden for yourself. Mother's Day is on Sunday. It is the perfect, it's been listed as the Mother's Day pick by a number of places. So order it for your mother.
Hey,
your
that's
mother-in-law,
great. Yes.
and order.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Mother's Day.
And there have been teachers that have been continuing to support your students as well. So if you need end of the year teacher gifts, this is a perfect gift for them. And for everybody that orders, I'm doing personalized complimentary book plates and bookmarks. Just email gary@violashipman.com, and I will send as many as I need to all of you in beautiful note cards as thank you for your support, and thank you all for tonight. Authors are going through heck right now, and to have this sort of support means the world. I appreciate it.
I just want to thank everybody and give a final toast. Let's remember each other most of all, and all the people that we love the most in this very difficult time. Thank you all for being with us. Thank you, Viola Shipman, aka Wade Rouse. Here's to you, and here's to everybody and all of our friends. Thank you and good night.
Thank you all. We wouldn't have a bookstore without you, and a garden, and a women's speaker series. So thank you.
Thank you.